I'll start first with the first item on the agenda, contracts. Contracts for which Cabinet granted its no objections to the award. And in the education sector, the consultancy for studies for the establishment of a business development unit and a research and innovation fund. And this is at the University of Guyana under the Government of Guyana World Bank project. And that is to the tune of 165,000 US. Our mathematicians have advised me that's about 34.3 million Guyana dollars. 34.3 million Guyana dollars. The next one, again in the educational sector, and again the World Bank project at the University of Guyana, and this is dealing with the procurement of contractors for civil works at the university there, and that is for the faculties, agriculture, and forestry, and technology, and also natural science, and the School of Art and Environmental Science. The two awards aggregately $1,162,696,000 Guyana dollars, 1.16 billion Guyana dollars for the rehabilitation of those faculties under the loan program. Litigation. Even in the absence of a sitting parliament, the issues surrounding public expenditure management remain controversial and often end in litigation. The Minister of Finance, and using his power, constitutional and statutory power, to spend under Cabinet's guidance, was again at the receiving end of another court challenge by the opposition. The occasion was the policy-based loan that was in the environmental sector, recently signed by the Board of Directors of the IDB and the Government of Guyana. The issue, what was the issue? It appeared to be whether the proceeds of that loan were to be disbursed by government in the absence of an appropriate Appropriation Act. And as you're aware, disbursements from the consolidated fund indeed statutorily, constitutionally require an Appropriation Act. The matter continues in court. But it is Cabinet's contention, it's Cabinet's view that it was, and it is, wholly unnecessary. And obviously, it was aimed to convey to the public, and at this time to the electorate, more negativities about government spending. The fact of the matter is, as is known by those who engage in the litigation, that the proceeds of the policy-based loan are indeed deposited in the consolidated fund, and indeed remain in the consolidated fund as long as there isn't and there has not been an appropriation act for the proceeds to be disbursed. In essence, the move to litigation was not, in Cabinet's view, a smoke screen, just another opportunity to harp, to continue bringing to the public's attention this issue of Minister Dr. Ashley Singh's spending and issues surrounding public expenditure management. And this litigation, Cabinet contends, was totally unnecessary. That's my statement. And as I indicated earlier, the floor is now open for questions on my opening statement and equally for questions on any other matter of topical interest to you, the ladies and gentlemen of the media. Thank you.
Dr. Luncheon, Vanessa Narangana Chronicle, on your opening statements, the contracts. Now, for at least 3 weeks, you've explained that spending is guided by legislation and the Constitution, and you can't spend outside of those that framework. But there's still been concerns publicized in the media from the opposition talking about why is government still moving ahead with these contracts despite the explanations. What is your response to that?
The absence of the Appropriation Act is essentially the statutory hurdle. So funds in the consolidated fund are otherwise unavailable at a time like this in the absence of an Appropriation Act. Save and except that 1/12 rule with which hopefully we're all familiar, which makes provision for the expenditure for government business to continue to be available even in the absence of an Appropriation Act. I believe I cited issues like getting vaccines and paying salaries and such like that couldn't conceivably be withheld because there wasn't an Appropriation Act. So statutorily, the 1/12 provision was in place, and it essentially said the year before, for any budget agency, you would aggregate their capital and the current expenditure, and in the year in which there isn't an appropriation act, 1/12 of that money is provided monthly.
The explanation is understood. The question is, do you think it's disingenuous by some members of the political opposition to keep harping on these concerns when the provisions, the legislative provisions, are clear?
Well, this is the point I was making in my opening statement. Minister Singh was again challenged by a former Minister of Finance on the issue of this policy-based loan. And when one examines the body, the recitation of the former ministers and his challenge, it was quite clear that this was an unnecessary foray into the code, because the policy-based loan, the proceeds went in to the consolidated fund, and there is ample evidence to show that no withdrawals were made from the consolidated fund because an appropriation act was not in place. Hence, a challenge to an event that did not take place in terms of withdrawal, and a challenge of an event that did take place, the deposition of the fund in the consolidated fund, it, to Cabinet's mind, was clearly aimed at not a court decision or a court hearing. It was intended for the public, for the electorate, to keep before it the specter of Dr. Singh and his quote-unquote alleged unconstitutional spending of public funds.
The young lady at the back is the third person who says.
Good morning, Dr. Luncheon. Kiana Wilbur, Kite News. I was just wondering if you could explain for me how does government plan to move forward with the recent judgment given to Booker Tate that Guy Suko should pay over $204 million. And I would also like to know if you can update on the repayment so far for the Skeldon Sugar Factory.
I'm afraid.
How far along are we with that loan?
Yeah, I'm afraid you have me there on both counts. I'll have to offer to provide this information subsequently. I am unaware of the court ruling on the 204. I suppose this is US millions or Guyana millions? Guyana millions. I don't know what it is all about. And so I'll have to get back to you on that. And the second one, the repayment of the loan, that the loaning, the financing of the Skeldon factory. Again, I'm not conversant with that information, and I will move apace to have it provided to you.
Dr. Luncheon, would you be able to?
It's just if you can answer the question. No. Is there someone else I saw on this side? Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Luncheon. Davina Samu from Guyana Times. Could you provide some clarification on this issue in the Stabrook News this morning? There was an article where Lisa Hamilton, she is saying that the government promised to provide some scholarships for her to study and other top students to study at a university of their choice, but she's saying that that promise was not upheld. She's a top student.
Okay, well, I really couldn't answer that question. I know that the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Education, and the Public Service Management has indeed, up to 2014, been honoring the obligation, the undertaking that Cabinet made that top students CSEC and top student CAPE would be provided with such. I want to believe 2015 is a bit of what the people would say is a different kettle of fish because of the absence of an appropriation bill. So once expenditure in any budget agency exceeds the 1/12 that they are provided with by Ministry of Finance, it means those expenditures would not be honored. I would want to assume that Miss Hamilton, I want to believe that she probably has fallen into that category. My office is replete, my blotter is replete with instances where expenditure by budget agencies that go beyond the 1/12, those expenditures are not met. In some cases, they lapse, and they have written the HPS soliciting an intervention that I regrettably have to advise is not within my purview, is not within my authority. There isn't an Appropriation Act, and therefore until such time as the 11th Parliament is convened and a budget is passed and an Appropriation Act becomes law, that those expenditures would not be met, and so essentially a holding pattern was what would be in place. But I would follow up to ensure that that is specifically the issue. I suspect it is because PSM has indicated at Cabinet that even in some instances, students who are on scholarships abroad have been unable to receive their stipends because of this self-same No Appropriation Act, when there is no sit-in Parliament and only 1/12 of the previous year expenditure being available to meet all the expenditures of a current month.
All right, get the microphone in the meeting. Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Luncheon, Shanza Samuels from NCN. I would like to bring you back to the opposition's concerns as it relates to the voters list. They're claiming that the list is dirty. So in terms of getting Cabinet's response to the opposition's objection.
Well, I would want to perhaps join with GCOM, because this is not an accusation that can be leveled at the administration. This list is peculiarly and exclusively GCOM's list. It's GCOM's doing. So I would want to join with GCOM in perhaps responding in part, but also to give some of Cabinet's own responses to these disclosures. The first GCOM's response, and I think it is something that should be noted, is after endless rounds of continuous how you call it, registration and claims and objections and supported by biometrics. This allegation of a padded voters list seems a bit of some type of electoral ploy, particularly because it has been raised at this point. No, not before, and not by the opposition members who sit on GCOM. So that's the first point. And I think it was amply said by GCOM itself. Because as I said, this is a GCOM problem. If indeed the list is padded, you gotta go to GCOM and talk to GCOM about padding and not the administration. So rounds, successive rounds of continuous registration, claims and objections, biometrics testing the fingerprints of those who get on the list has conveyed, at least to the administration, some degree of confidence in this list. Some degree of confidence. And they, I guess one would have to say the same is, it is equally so at the level of the members of the opposition appointed on that commission, the opposition representatives, because the issue of padding has, we are told, not been raised by them. We see this more sinisterly at Cabinet though, because the Brigadier didn't raise this matter in Georgetown at any of the public meetings in the regions where, if padding were to have taken place or is taking place, it would be reflected in the divisional list. He raised it in New York, of all places. And you know, a big part of the appreciative audience, fundraisers in particular, do reside in New York. It's the home of endless numbers, former members of the disciplined forces. And colloquially, if I was to try a thing, I would go there too and try a thing. And this is the type of reception that has been evinced from Cabinet on being informed of this latest ploy of the APNU AFC electoral pact leader. The padded list surfacing, or allegations of a padded list surfacing for the first time in New York. There seems to be some things that you don't talk about in Guyana or different parts of Guyana, and you have to have a select audience. This is the way in which Cabinet has interpreted this allegation of a padded list.
Adam Harris, Prime News, sir. Two questions. One, the government seems to harbor the view that there is something military about the support Granger is getting for purposes other than just national life. Why is this so? And the other question I wanted to ask had to do with expenditure outside of the Appropriation Act. For example, what is the state of play on the expansion of the Chelly Jagan International Airport And what will be the fate of the money that you just got from the IDB and the World Bank for the UG project? Is that going into the consolidated fund also to sit until?
I'll deal with your second question first, in that the Ministry of Finance, even more after hearing Adams's question, would be exhorted to provide for the media and the public's attention procedures surrounding the loan proceeds and how they are handled by the administration, both in sitting parliament, in the time of a sitting parliament, and outside of a sitting parliament. Policy-based loans, as the one that has been challenged, whether parliament sits or not, the coffers of the consolidated fund remain open, and policy-based loans and the proceeds of policy-based loans, they go directly into the consolidated fund once the policies are met. So in the case of this environmental sector policy-based loans, there were certain policies that the government had to have put in place. Some of it statutorily, you have to pass laws, some of it executive, cabinet directives. Once those policies would have been met, then Guyana became eligible to receive the loan. And that loan goes directly into the Consol Fund. And that's generally for policy-based loans. The second category, these are the real project loans that involve civil works, you know, like for instance, you mentioned the CGIA expansion. The role of the consolidated fund is minimal. The role of the consolidated fund is minimal. The lender, IFIs, or our bilateral partners, they disburse funds to those who supply goods and services. So it is not the government that takes money out of the Consol Fund because the loan never went in to the consolidated fund. So if I have an Exim Bank, let us take an Exim Bank, India, China, wherever, and I have a loan from the Exim Bank, when contractors provide a service, whether it is goods, civil works, they are paid directly by the lender, whether it's the IDB or the CDB or the Exim Bank. They are paid directly. So that money technically does not enter into the Consol Fund. This is hallowed. This is what has taken place since the creation of the Consol Fund and the resort to external financing of Guyana's development. But as I said in my opening statement, the Ministry of Finance, obviously in the context of the questions that are being asked, will put out a special bulletin that addresses in its entirety the procedures that are in place when loans are received by the government for the purposes of developmental projects in Guyana. So I will be certain to have that documentary done, and done urgently. I believe Dr. Singh, in his comments at Cabinet, provided a synopsis, a summary of those procedures, and I'm certain that he would be more than happy to elaborate and share that with the public. More than happy. Your first question, you said the government seems. I would want to say it is a little bit more than seems at this point. It's a little bit more. I have sounded the warning, and hopefully some of my more recent writings would be in the media soon on the military political alliance, to really reveal the depth of our concern, about the militarization of the leadership of this opposition party, the main opposition party. I take it that there isn't a question as to the militarization, the very presence of endless numbers of senior, albeit retired, military officers in the leadership of APNU. I take it that there isn't a question about the influx of military, again, former retired military officers into Guyana at this time to support APNU in its campaign. What you seem to be saying, Adam, is what's the basis of the government's concern about this feature? What's the basis? And if I am correct, I merely have to say Guyana went down a road under the Bornomite People's National Congress, a road that was facilitated by the concept of party paramountcy that brought the disciplined forces, particularly the military, to be a part of the enforcement arm of the then government. I suppose one may want to argue that point, but I don't believe an argument could be sustained that the military was not an active participant into the repression that took place in the years of the PNC, the Bornomite PNC government in this country. I don't think we can argue about that. And the concern that I have dates back to 1992. When my president, Dr. Jagan, says, Luncheon, you and the then Minister of Home Affairs, Feroz Mohammed, you are tasked with rehabilitating the image of the military in the minds of Guyanese. Because this is a national institution. And this specter of it being a handmaiden of the Bornomite PNC and perpetrating all of the indecencies and the excesses on the Guyanese people We cannot allow that to cloud our image and our judgment on this military. Luncheon and Mohammed, y'all got a job. Clean up. Make sure that this image is corrected. I want to believe we've done a good job. I want to believe that today a professional military exists that on its post-1992 actions has endeared itself to the Guyanese people, its exploits, its achievements, and what it has done for individuals, communities, and for this nation. I believe the military has. But I don't believe that our memory is so short that when we see these same two bodies getting back together again, it doesn't reasonably raise our suspicions and causes us to wonder, what if? Suppose, heaven forbid, APNU were to succeed in the 2015 elections. Obviously, they would have a serious debt to pay to these military, to pay back. As it is, the discerning reporter would know that there has never since 2011 been any question whatsoever in Parliament about appropriations, about resourcing, or the denial of resourcing for the military. This APNU has always seen it appropriate to join with the government in its financing and resourcing of the military. One can only wonder were this opportunity to be provided again, how are you to be certain that we're not going to have the same outcome? That indeed, in the face of an opposition in the PPP, that same military in the Burnhamite era that supported the PNC in their illegal and undemocratic actions might not be coerced into doing the same under a possible APNU administration. I spoke about this matter. I wrote Granger. I said, I think this is the worst decision you ever made in your life. Short term, yes, a military injection has a lot to do. They're well trained. And a military injection probably has a lot to do with the successes in being the APNU head, in being the leader of the PNC. But it will reawake. It will arouse fears that have been dormant, that we have been succeeding in allaying. It would raise those fears again. And I don't believe it is in the interest of the military. I will write on these matters because of much of what APNU has done is run-of-the-mill, I would say, politicking, with which I disagree vehemently. But you see, this one, it has undone 23 years of patient cultivation by this administration. That is what Granger has done. Because don't fool yourself, whether it is the retired military that is flocked, encouraged to flock, the APNU and positioned in the APNU leadership, one can only imagine the impact on the serving military. One can only imagine the impact on the serving military. And who got ears to hear, let them hear.
Dr. Luncheon, Neil Marks, Capital News. Sir, a question about the use of the state media. Sir, who or what controls the policy at NCN, radio and television, regarding the barring of even paid advertisements by the Alliance for Change? And also, sir, is the President intent on addressing or responding to a letter by the Private Sector Commission regarding creating a level playing field in the state media for all political parties in the run-up to the elections?
The first question, I think you're dealing with state policy routinely about access to the media. But in the context of elections, there is, and as far as I know, it has never been revoked, a GCOM statutory responsibility of assigning and enforcing equal access. GCOM. I think there is a law, I may be corrected, but I think that there is such a law that imposes on GCOM that responsibility to ensure equal access to the state, well, not state and private media. I think there is such a law. Your second question, I know the President has had a number of correspondence from the private sector. I know the debate with Mr. Granger is go, go, go. This is the presidential debate with Mr. Granger, is go, go, go. This other one, I am yet to be made aware, but I, again, would believe the President would invoke the statutory provision, whether it's in the Broadcast Act or in the Representation of the People's Act or in whichever statute, that yes, equal access is fundamental where the media, both state and private media, concern during an election period.
NCN. Dr. Luncheon, the Kaiser News today reported that 4 government officials' visas were revoked by the U.S. Embassy.
Excuse me, could you allow
Can
the
you say
reporter
who are
to
these
ask a question?
persons?
I don't know. Normally, an act of this sort would be done through notification at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and no such notification has been provided. And I did take the opportunity of directly being advised by Mr. Hunt Decharge, and he has confirmed that this is not so. This is entirely not so, and it must be corrected. He is going to issue a statement. Well, he has issued, well, we spoke about an hour ago, he is going to issue a statement disassociating himself from that report.
Let me tell you, nobody here has a monopoly in questions. So when the reporters are asking, I wish we don't exercise the level of intolerance I see displayed just now. Okay? So there's a final question. Yes.
Clarification on the case with Ms. Hamilton. Her contention is that she wanted a scholarship to Yale. I know Guyana has partnerships with India, Cuba, and Russia.
No, these are scholarships that my understanding is your choice. I don't.
Your choice.
This thing with going to Cuba is a Cuba and a government of Guyana engagement. The CAPE and the CXC is a student and the government engagement.